Ego, the living planet, is another one of those fascinating creations that came from the brilliant mind of Jack Kirby, who always seemed to have a special interest in the wonders of outer space, giving us some of the coolest cosmic characters and concepts in all of comics. Ego, the living planet, is a very unusual character, unusual villain, with a peculiar history in comic books. It's an intelligent, sentient world with an extreme superiority complex, believing it to be better than everyone else, viewing everything around it as microbial and insect-like in comparison. It's a world that is constantly growing in knowledge and physically evolving, almost like a virus, but one that has found itself isolated for millions of years, hence the toxic psychological issues it has developed. In the comics, Ego has been frequently labeled a bioverse. Every part of its being is alive, from its geography to its atmosphere, and even plant-like growths on its surface. All of its organic features are manipulated by its consciousness. It can change its outer appearance to look barren or beautiful, control its radiation and magnetic fields to lure in travelers, and though it does communicate using telepathy, will form a nose, mouth, and set of glowing eyes to make communication more dramatic if necessary. Inside the planet are various tunnels that act like arteries in a way. Chemicals that make up the living planet's composition allow it to absorb and digest other planets, stars, and living creatures as if it had a stomach. This nourishment sustains Ego's vast psionic abilities. Offensively, Ego can reach out and grab things by forming tendril arms for itself. It has humanoid antibodies that it will use to attack intruders on its surface, originally based on Thor's molecular model, and can regenerate itself over time. Ego can increase or decrease the temperature of its exterior and or interior to kill any unwanted trespassers, and deep within the planet's core is a brain-like organ that contains Ego's consciousness. Ego will usually create one or more pseudo-brains though, fake ones, to protect the real thing. Ego, the living planet, came to be after a cosmic being known as the Stranger had conducted an experiment on his home star, which caused it to go nova and consume the twin planets orbiting it. On one of these planets was a scientist named Urgos, who tried desperately to save his people from the impending Armageddon. He created a massive bunker beneath the surface of his world, called Project World Core, that he and the rest of his race would hide in as the surface layers of their planet were destroyed. They would all lie in specially designed sleeping chambers, chambers that would end up becoming their tombs. In issue 228 of Thor Volume 1, Thor Odinson experiences Urgos' final moments firsthand, telepathically. The nova hit the planet sooner than Urgos had calculated, and with very little time, the scientist chose to save himself and no one else. The solar shock that hit the planet merged Urgos with every living thing on his world that was destroyed by it. Urgos became one with all those he betrayed. I guess it was the universe's way of punishing him. After millions of years gestating alone in space, Ego would be attacked by Galactus, the devourer of worlds. Galactus discovered that the planet was sentient and sought to study Ego before feeding on it. Ego would defend itself though, becoming the first literal planet to ever do so against the might of Galactus. A heated rivalry would be ignited between the two of them, an ongoing battle of inflated egos, a galaxy-wide pissing contest featuring two very unique godlike beings that each believe themselves to be the greatest and strongest in the universe. The first Marvel hero to encounter Ego, the living planet, was Thor, who saved the sentient world from the clutches of Galactus, and as a result, Ego allowed the Wanderers, survivors of the planets Galactus had devoured, who had banded together to live there, making Ego their new home. Unfortunately, the living planet would not get too attached to them, and would later consume them all for energy. Why? Because a sample of ego would be stolen by a Rigelian named Tana Nile and deposited on a primitive planet called Blackworld in the hopes of transforming it into a more habitable world. This stolen piece of ego would grow its very own consciousness and evolve like a cancer, becoming Ego Prime. It believed the Earth was just like its homeworld of ego, that humans were blind and unthinking diseases, and sought to use its powers to merge all of the living beings of Earth into the planet, like Urgos had been merged with his all those years ago. Ego Prime would then intend to move on to the rest of the universe, bringing about peace, saving countless planets, and making all of them part of one undying bioverse. Ego Prime was defeated when it inadvertently drained all of its energy and disintegrated, though part of this energy would be transferred into 3 humans, who became young gods. Due to its cruel and selfish mass consumption of the Wanderers, with the help of Thor, Hercules, and Firelord, Ego, the living planet, would have a sidereal propulsion unit driven into its south polar axis by Galactus, shoved up its asshole essentially. The engine would continuously propel Ego in one direction, exiling it into the endless void of space, all alone, like it had been for millions of years prior. However, it would eventually learn how to control the engine itself, and would use it as a means of transportation to move around the universe. In issue 449 of Thor Volume 1, we learn through the High Evolutionary that Ego is just a smaller manifestation of a much larger creature called Superego. The High Evolutionary wanted to study this being extensively, and used the smaller ego as bait to lure it out. This thing, it's insane. I can't even effectively describe it. It's a clusterfuck of living tissue. The comic calls it a cancerous growth of galactic proportions, which sounds about right. It begins to devour Ego, squeezing it like a grape within the grasp of its enormous tendrils. I'd love to see the Avengers take this behemoth on, but it only appeared a few times and was quickly forgotten about, probably for the best. Ego would manage to escape and repair itself when Superego was killed by the Blue Celestial, an infant celestial born from the remains of the Black Galaxy, the part of the universe where Ego was created, that the living planet had completely destroyed millions of years ago, consuming all of the other planets, stars, and organic matter in the area. Following its encounter with Superego, Ego the living planet would be driven insane by the Kree's supreme intelligence. It would destroy countless planets in a fruitless search for another self-aware planet like itself, deeming all of the regular ones it encountered unworthy. Professor X, Silver Surfer, and the team of mutant Skrulls named Kadri K would be the ones to put an end to Ego's path of destruction. Xavier would probe Ego's mind and cause memories of the planet to come flooding back to it. Then he would gather the energy from psychics all across the universe and attack Ego's core with a concentrated blast. This would cause Ego to revert into a small, infant-like spore form, which was taken to Earth. But like any good monster movie, Ego escapes and begins growing over a small town in an attempt to grow large enough to consume the entire planet. We would come to learn that the Kree planned on turning Ego into a weapon to attack other planets as well, once it became strong enough. Those sons of bitches. In Nova Volume 4, Ego would find itself merged with the Xandarian World Mind, the sentient supercomputer that acts as the heart of Xandar and its Nova core, containing all of the histories and experiences of Xandar and its people. The World Mind had reached out to Ego following a battle between Nova and Galactus. It wanted to find an ally, one strong enough to protect it and its knowledge from the Devourer of Worlds if he ever returned, and chose Ego, Galactus's longtime rival, as its vessel, its shield. Ego would begin corrupting the World Mind though. the selfish planet would become the new home of the Nova Corps, called New Xandar, and take over the minds of several Nova Centurions, accessing their near-limitless energy source all the members of the Nova Corps draw power from, called the Nova Force. In order to free the world mind from ego, Nova would be forced to lobotomize the living planet with a burst of Nova Force energy, and then later have mindless ones teleported inside of ego's brain to rip it apart from the inside out. Nasty. Like always, though, with enough time passing, ego would be able to repair itself. The planet would be tricked into joining a cult called the Brethren of the Forgotten Flame, who would use ego as a ritual site. The cult would seek to observe a hidden constellation of separate Skrullian constellations and commit a mass sacrifice on ego's surface. All of their deaths would cause ego to be slowly blanketed in a dark shell, which hatched, revealing that the dread Dormammu had taken over the living planet. Ego has always had various other forms or extensions of itself, from Ego Prime to Superego, and there was also another world with a consciousness created by the Stranger called Alter Ego, using a formula he had gotten from Tanalir Tivin or Tivon, the Collector. The Stranger would plan on giving the second planet to the Collector to add to his museum, but not before having Ego and Alter Ego fight to see which one of them was stronger. What a dick. Immediately after Alter Ego's creation, the two planets would sense themselves in each other and were drawn to one another. Ego seemed pleased to have a brother, but Alter Ego only wanted to kill Ego in order to remain unique. Thor would have to go between them and end their immature bickering, something a lot of siblings can relate to. They both apologize. It's kind of funny. But swerve! Ego would attack Alter Ego and seemingly destroy the yellow planet, something it regrets right away, becoming quite emotional. Thankfully, Alter Ego would survive and would become Ego's moon, so neither of them would have to be alone. How nice. Ego, the living planet, is one of the most unusual characters in all of comics, in my opinion. It's such a weird concept to wrap your head around. A planet that's literally alive, but one that has remained interesting and original even after all these years. I like how its stories dive into psychological issues, such as egotism, isolation, and loneliness. And there are some religious themes sprinkled in as well, regarding divine creation and resurrection. After all, Ego is essentially a god, a special one-of-a-kind cosmic entity, who I guess oddity might be more fitting. There is nothing else like it in the universe. I want to thank you all for tuning in to watch this installment of Supervillain Breakdown. I hope you found it entertaining and insightful. If you'd like to support my channel and ensure the future of its content, you can do so by subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, and becoming a producer over on patreon.com if you can. Any bit helps. I will see you all in the next one. Take care and stay nerdy.